Hi, this is Dennis, and today I get to work on one of our viewers' family treasures. This one is a Penn 104. It's part of the Penn Silver series. It was a reel manufactured in Japan. It's a one-ball bearing reel. This one comes in from Barry, and he's asked me if I could just be so good as to tune it up for him. So the first thing I like to do when I'm doing a tune-up is to test the reel. So I'm going to turn it. There's a little bit of burring noise in there. The anti-reverse works. The bail is a little bit sticky. We'll see if we can solve that sticky bail without doing anything. Well, it works a little bit. And a quick solve on that, or to test if it's a bent bail wire, which will cause that little ballerina kind of effect, or if it's just sticking, is to put some penetrating oil on there. And if it just kind of starts flipping easily, which it's doing right now, then there's really no reason to... Oh, it's getting stuck a little bit. We'll probably go back and adjust that. It looks like the bail may be bent just a little bit out of shape. But for the most part, not a crisis, and that penetrating oil has freed that up significantly. So I'm kind of thinking we don't need to do anything at this point because I'm 10 in a row and you don't want to sit here and watch me all day do that. While I have that penetrating oil out, we're going to be servicing the case completely. We're going to take it apart piece by piece. We'll show you how the reel comes together. We'll show you how to service it, how to put it back together again, and how to ensure that it has a lifelong effect of continuing to go fishing. Well, we have 3 case screws that probably haven't been addressed in quite some time. So I took the penetrating oil and I made sure that we could get a head start on that by doing that. Typical of the reels of the time, this coating here, this chrome coating or silver coating or whatever it may have been, is starting to get some freckles on it. That's typical of the reel. Otherwise, this reel is in very good shape. I've seen a lot of these reels used in a saltwater environment that are at the point now where they've lost all of their paint. They've got a lot of corrosion on them and so on. But this one overall is in good condition. All right, we're going to take the star adjuster off. That's going to enable me to remove the spool. We'll get to the spool later. And then we're going to just remove each piece. And while I do that, and when I do that, I like to put all the parts that I take into a tray. That way I can know where to find them when it's time to go reinstall. Let's take the handle off. The handle comes off in a clockwise manner. And just like I felt with that other one, I'm feeling that there's a little bit of corrosion, so let's go ahead and make sure that you get a good shot of that penetrating oil to loosen up the salt. And we can do that in a couple of different places. Inside the knob, at the joint where the knob meets the handle, the swing arm for the folding of the handle, and inside that little piece that is the spacer there. Once we do that now, we've let that penetrating oil sit for a little bit. This has a screw that can either be used as a flat-bladed screw or as a Phillips head screw. I like to make the first few turns with the flat-bladed screw just to make sure that if there is any salt or anything else binding up in the case, that you break that without breaking the screw. And then you can move over to a Phillips head screw driver. All right. This one is a number 1 head on the Phillips head. I'm going to take those, I'm going to lay them into my parts tray, and I'm going to keep them together. And I'm also going to take them a moment here to notice whether there's any difference in the length of those screws. Because every now and then a manufacturer will put a long one or a short one in the case. And if that's what happens, you want to note that. Next thing up, I'm going to keep the case on. I'm going to spin it, and I have this where the anti-reverse is engaged. Whenever I take a case off, I like to make sure that I have it in the off position, just in case there's any interference there with the main gears or the shaft or whatever. All right, the 3 case screws are out. We can remove the case. And here's what you'll see is driving this reel now. We have a crosswind arm. We have a pin into the crosswind block. Then we have our main gear. It's held together here with a bushing. This bushing can come out. There's people that work on these reels that substitute bearings where these bushings are, and that's a way to hot rod the reel, and if you want to do that, that's fine. And then we have a little copper washer that keeps the crosswind arm in its track. So I'm just going to keep those in that order. Now we should be able to remove that crosswind arm. Pay attention here. You want to make sure that you install it the same way it came out. It's easy to flip this over. And one of the ways to note that which side is which is to obviously do a visual check. Well, on the back side here, this is a little bit less polished, and it's also a square shoulder. The front side has a rounded shoulder and a little bit more polish. So this is a good place to tell you if you are working on your reel, and maybe you haven't worked on it before, stop and take pictures along the way. Those pictures will tell you the orientations of the parts, and they will also tell you how to put it back together again if you get stuck. Maybe you forgot which part went where. Well, a quick look at a picture will help. You also would have the benefit of going to a site like mysticparts.com and pulling the schematic for this reel. That'll give you a burst diagram of it. Also valuable there is if you need a replacement part, you can order that part from them if the part is available. So take pictures, use the schematic, take your time, have a lot of patience, and generally you can get through this pretty easily. Alright, I've just removed the axle shaft and I've taken my paper towel to wipe off the dried grease. This reel looks, if anything, to have a need for grease rather than having too much dried grease in that play. When you remove that axle shaft, now you can remove the main gear. And on the back of the main gear is that second bushing. I'm going to take the time to clean that off now. And again, you could replace this with a bearing. So how do you do that? Well, you take the measurements. You want to measure the width of the bearing, the outside diameter of the bearing, or in this case the bushing. And the outside diameter goes from point to point, and then the inside diameter of the ring going from the inside point to point as well. And that'll tell you what you can get in terms of a measurement for a replacement bearing if you were so desiring to upgrade the reel from bushing to bearing. This reel has one ball bearing. It's up top here. It's under the case, and that's where we'll go in just a moment. We took the main gear off. I want to clean the main gear. And you can tell winter's coming. I have my heater going in the back of the shop, and I do apologize if that noise becomes a nuisance, but got to keep warm, and that's one way to do it here. It is winter, and I guess you have to put up with that. So in the summertime, I put up with fans, and air conditioners and the like. In the wintertime, I guess it's the bane of the heaters and the blowers, but do apologize in advance for that. Okay, I've cleaned up the old grease on that shaft. If you found it was stubborn, you could go ahead and use a penetrating oil to remove additional residue. And my general rule with cleaning anything is use the least abrasive setup that you can, and only go to something like a harsh steel roller. In this case, I'm just scraping a little bit of dry grease off the collar. But if you don't need to do that, and a paper towel will suffice, well then by all means just use the paper towel. Main gear is clean. There's very little to do in the case. There's just a little bit here of the dry grease. I'm going to take the crosswind block out. I'm going to do that so that I can remove the grease inside here. And Armando, you can see why my screwdriver tip kind of wears down. A little bit of scraping in there. Then I'm going to use a cotton swab to get inside that channel. We'll put fresh grease in there, and that'll be ready to go again. For the grease, I'm using a fishing reel grease. It's Penn Precision Reel Grease. I don't care which grease you use, but I do care that you use a fishing reel grease and fishing reel oils that are designed for them as your go-to in terms of the replacement greases and oils. All right, I need a 14 millimeter, I think. And you should be able to use an open end or a box wrench on this because there's very little lip. If you did find out that you couldn't get the clearance you need for that, go to a socket wrench and you'll be able to remove it that way. All right, this comes off in a traditional counterclockwise manner. And we should just be able to lift up on this, and you can see the anti-reverse setup here now. We have what's called a forked or a tongue for the anti-reverse. I'm going to flip the switch over and show you how that operates. So that is a friction-driven one. You have a fork that rides on both sides of this ratchet. When you're spinning, it kicks it out, you can see, and when you go to stop it, reversing it pulls the dog in. So we're going to take that off because we want to get down to the bearing so that we can clean the bearing and re-lube that. So we'll take the screw that's holding the dog out, and as I was mentioning before, taking pictures, well, this is a good place to take the pictures so that you note the orientation of the dog and the ratchet just in case. Get that backwards or it doesn't come up easily. All right, I'm trying to get that click ratchet off now. Just simply pulling up. And then this is another good place to take a picture. You'll notice that this collar is not rounded throughout. This collar has a flat side. The flat side faces that anti-reverse dog. So make sure when you go to reinstall, the flat side is back. All right, 2 screws are going to hold the rest of the assembly on. And if you find any resistance at all, don't be afraid to go in there and use that penetrating oil to loosen it up. You're going to re-lube later, but don't be afraid to use that. On an older reel where there hasn't been any service in quite some time, it's imperative that you do that if you don't want to go risk breaking parts. Even doing that, you're risking it because they've been set so long, and if these reels were used in a saltwater environment, well, there's a chance that the salt mist has dried, caked in there, and become kind of a permanent bond. So anything you can do to give yourself the advantage in not breaking something is a good idea. We just did the 2 screws. The collar can come off. You'll notice that the other collar that sits on top of the bearing came off as well. That's fine. All right, I'm looking at pretty much some dried grease in there, so let's flood the bearing from both sides. And with any luck, we'll be able to push that bearing up and pull it out. And if it's not our lucky day, what I always suggest is take the rotor, put it back on without the tie downs, and use that as a knob or a handle to help leverage that piece out. There we go. Just have some patience with it. I like that handle approach on these, and it seems to work for me. Okay, so before I put this down, I've been asked about that bail on several occasions. How do you fix a ballerina, if you will? Well, this case, this one worked, right? It's not sticking there. But you can tell you have a bent bail if you have a bail arm that's got a greater space on the top than the bottom on either side. If you've got it veering out this way, where the top has got a big gap and the bottom doesn't, it means that this has been pressed in and that the torsion from that bail arm is pushing the arm out. If you have it where there's a gap on the bottom but not the top, it means it got compressed this way, got pointed out there, and it's pulling that arm in and creating a gap below. Okay, and I've done a video on this one. What you would do is you would remove the screw, and depending on which side the bail wire sprung to, you would just reshape it in the arc to pull the wire in if it's out here, or to pull it out if it's there. That's kind of how you solve that. This one doesn't have that problem. All right, let's go over to the pinion gear and bearing. You'll notice on the bearing side that we have ball bearings, and we have a shield on the top side. That's important. You want to make sure that you install it with the shield up, because when water runs through the rotor, It'll come through the rotor, it'll splash down on this bearing, and if you have the bearing upside down, well, it's kind of a natural cup. These are steel bearings, they will rust, and that'll be a problem later on. I oil bearings, so I'm going to turn the bearing upside down. I'm going to oil it. I'm just going to put that off to the side for a moment. We're going to clean the bottom of the pinion gear here. I'm just going to grab a soft brush. You can get these in the dollar stores or the hardware stores or the like. They're not expensive. You can use a toothbrush if you like, but what I use this for is to clear out all the old grease from the channel, just like we cleared out the grease on the main gear. I use a paper towel behind it so that I can pull the grease off and let it sit on that towel, and that it doesn't get on my workbench later and cause problems for the next reel I'm working on. All right, we're in good condition there. I'm going to go back to that grease because it's time to do another relube. We're going to take the grease and get it into the teeth of the gear. When you're working on that gear, check all the teeth. Make sure that they're uniform. They're not bent, broken, chipped, or cracked. Get a good amount in there. It's been a while since it's had grease. I also like to put a grease coating along the inside of the pinion gear where this is going to ride. We'll put the bearing on. And lately I've been putting a coat of grease onto the outside of the bearing so the next guy who services this, guy or gal, whoever services this reel next, doesn't have to work as hard to get that out of the channel like I did. Okay, we can reinstall the bearing and the pinion gear now. Simply work it in. It's a pretty tight fit. You can see why it was a little hard to come out, because it's a little hard to go back in. So you have to square it up and just kind of keep working it back in till you're flush. So if you like these videos, I'd ask you to subscribe to my channel. If you do subscribe to my channel, please hit the notification button, and that'll tell you when I'm posting. And when I'm posting, you'll be able to see what videos I'm working on in terms of reels. And if you like those kinds of reels, or if you want to learn more about them, well, that's a great opportunity to go and watch them. And of course, I work on everything. This happens to be a spin fishing reel, but I work on conventional reels, trolling reels, round bait casters, low profile bait casters, just about every kind of reel that's made, and you'll find me working on. And what you're really doing is you're looking over my shoulder in my shop on reels that come in for service and repair. So you'll see a lot more saltwater reels, I guess, in this area than you will some freshwater reels, but that's okay. I try to work on everything and try to provide a good mix along the way. This is the fork I was telling you about before. That's going to grab both sides of that click ratchet. I'm going to clean off some of the grease on that. And you want to make sure you have the proper orientation. So that's where the look at the pictures will help. These forks, the tips do not need to touch. You just need to make sure that they have friction, which is what's happening here. If they can hold the ratchet like that, you have plenty of friction there. I'm going to mount the pieces together, put that over the gear, then we're going to turn it so that we can align the mounting hole with the screw hole in the case. We'll go grab that shouldered screw. That screw has a smooth surface shoulder, and you want to make sure that you get that in all of the way. Don't stop if the screw kind of jams up on the piece. Just keep working it until you have that shoulder. And again, a good test, just run it now. We got to move that off. Run it so that when you're turning it outbound, it's working okay. And as soon as you pull it back in, it sets that anti-reverse. That's set now. We can go back now, take that rotor that was, one more thing we can do here. There's a little spring mechanism here with the trip lever. You can see it come out. That's going to hit the ramp and pop back in. You can put some oil in there and reset it this way. All right, push the rotor or the pinion gear up for installing the rotor. I just noticed that I missed a piece. Once you have the collar on, you want to put the little spacer that goes next, that sits between the bearing and the click ratchet. This is the ratchets for the anti-reverse. This is your anti-reverse dog. This is what we were talking about before with the forked setting. These tips do not need to touch. They just need to be able to hold the click ratchet like that. If you can hold it there, you've got enough friction to operate that anti-reverse. Take the two of those. You want to line that up. You got to square shoulders on the pinion gear. Then line it up with the hole in the side case. And then we have that shouldered screw. It's got a wider top than bottom. You want to make sure that you get that seated into the case. And make sure that the shoulder top does not get trapped like that. You need to just work that gear or that dog around until you get that shoulder to clear so that you can be tight in the case. And then you can give it a little test. You can, well, you need to put it in the off position. There you go. Give it a test. Make sure that it bounces back and that when you go to reverse that it pulls in. So this one is operating properly. Okay, put the rotor on then. Grab the rotor nut. And the top end of this reel is done. We'll come back and we'll do the drag washers when we're done with the reel, but for now the top end is doing what it should be doing. Grab your wrench, make sure that that nut is tight, and give it a spin. Okay, give it a spin, make sure it's doing what it's doing. Nicely operating. Let's go down and rebuild the rest of the reel then. Okay, we're reversing the way that we took this out. So next up would be the main gear. And while I'm putting the grease on the main gear, I'm checking the teeth. And it's a good time to say if you have any questions on this reel or any reel in particular, maybe you're working on one and you're stuck. Maybe you just want to know a little bit more about the reels of the time or whatever, leave them in the comments section. I'll be happy to try and answer those questions for you and point you in terms of an assist on a repair, for example, if you're a little bit stuck, and try to help you along with that. Okay, a little bit of grease onto the back of the crosswind block. That's going to ride on the channels, so you can get a little bit of grease onto each channel as well. Remember the orientation on this. If you were unsure, go back to your pictures. It's easy enough to go ahead and install it that way, or at least try to. So take a check. Don't be in a rush to do anything. Next up then would be the axle shaft. Just a light coating of grease on the axle shaft, because if you put too much grease on the axle shaft, it's just going to stick out in the collar here. It'll get scraped off to the side, and well, it won't serve its purpose, right? Okay, now we're going to just grab the axle shaft and work that into the hole so that the hole aligns with the screw hole. We're going to go into our parts tray and grab the screw for that. And again, there's a lot of different screws in that parts tray. If you get confused, go back to your picture. Sometimes there's an identifying thing, like in this case, this one's a screw that only has a flat slot. There's other screws in there that have Phillips head slots, and you can, by process of elimination, start to figure out which one is which. Next up then is the arm that's going to work between the two. Get some grease onto that. Also get some grease onto where it's going to travel on your main gear. And then remember what we said, the rounded side goes out, over the top of the stud on the crosswind block, push up until you align it so that it sits properly there. Remember we said we have that little brass washer, and you'll see that the lip on that brass washer is just proud enough that it's going to hold this ring in as it travels around. Then we can take our main case, take the side plate, get a little bit of grease into the channel where that other pin is going to ride. And I use an artist's brush for the channel and for the grease. It just seems to be a way to get a consistent coat on. Then we can come over here, snap that side plate in place. Before you put any screws on, make sure that all of the seams are nice and tight, that you're not getting any resistance somewhere where you can't close it properly. Usually you can get a nice snap when it goes into place. But if you're not hearing that, if you're not seeing that it goes down easy, it means you got some torsion inside the reel. Maybe the main gear isn't seated properly or something. And if you get that torsion, well, the reel's not going to work properly. All right, I'm putting the 3 side plate screws in now. Again, I'm trying a new camera angle. I hope that it's a little bit more visible to you and that my hands stay out of the way. Every now and then, when I'm kind of doing this, it seems like an awkward angle, and it seems like, well, maybe I'm looking at it and seeing it, but you're not. So I hope that you're able to see that. Here's our freshly oiled up handle. We've oiled all of those socket points. Just put that on there for now. You don't need to do anything on this side. We've serviced the bushing. This handle is interchangeable. It can go from either side. Okay, so I gave it the spin test, and I just wasn't happy with that bearing. That bearing, when I oiled it up, just started making a whole lot of noise. So I went to my my bearing bin, got a new bearing. Now I've got a nice smooth operating reel ready for rebuild. All right, but when you're doing the reel, you got to do it all. You don't want to take it out there and find out that, well, the reel's cranking great, but you lost the fish because the drag washers are bad. You remove the pentagon clip to get to the drag washers, and then the drag washers should be a stack. Yep, they're Teflon washers. So with Teflon washers, all you want to do is make sure they're clean. You don't need to lubricate them. They're plastic and they're self-lubricating. Make sure your channel is clean. It's certainly clean. If there's a fault with the top drag washer systems, it's that the water, the line's coming in, the water on that wet line is hitting the button, coming in here and going underneath into your drag washer system. So you need to make sure that these stay clean, and if there's any debris or salt or the like, get it out of there before you continue. Otherwise you'll have an erratic performance of your drag system. I put the second washer in. We don't need to lube these, so it's going kind of quickly, and I apologize if I went quickly. There's second one in the stack, metal-wise, is the eared washer. It goes in the grooves. Then the top one, the top drag washer metal, is a round or keyed washer. And then we just reset that the pentagon clip in there. And be careful, it's a spring. It will fly if you're not careful. And then all you want to do is make sure that it's seated in that groove. The only purpose to that is a retention. It's going to hold the washers in place. I'm going to mount the spool, tighten the star adjuster, check to make sure it's holding. Okay, nothing left but the test now. Boy, there's a nice smooth operating reel. That bearing makes all the difference in the world. It's quieted it down. I don't want to say as good as new. This reel's 40 years old or so, so it's not exactly brandy new, but you know what? Anti-reverse off, anti-reverse on, bail trip, tripping nicely, drag holding, bad bearing replaced. This one's ready to go fishing again. So I hope you've all enjoyed that. To everybody who's a first responder and essential personnel, medical field worker and the like, thank you for everything it is that you're doing to keep us safe during the pandemic. To everybody, please stay safe, stay well, and stay watching. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.